Hi, my name is Stanley, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build your first YouTube filming set. I am starting this YouTube channel just because I want it to be a resource for other people, something to pay it forward. Back when I first started photography, there were a lot of resources that I was able to make use of online, and I was just hoping that I can pay it forward by creating a YouTube channel for other people as well. Most recently, I was asked about this filming setup itself, the one you see here, and basically, how do you set up a dedicated YouTube filming set for the first time, or if you already have one, how to improve it with some basic lighting techniques. I'll talk about a few topics related to that, including the lighting equipment that you might need, and then the ones that I use, along with your camera support systems. And I'll also briefly talk about sound equipment, because that's pretty important as well, and also cameras and lenses. Since this video won't be too much about the cameras and lenses themselves, I'll start with that first and just be a little brief about it. I would say that the minimum requirements for starting up a YouTube channel and filming your own content, the requirements on the camera that you use really aren't that high. I would say nowadays, pretty much any camera from any of the major brands, such as Sony, Canon, Nikon, Fujifilm, Panasonic, they should be pretty good with regards to being able to output quality content for YouTube videos. A few features you might want to look for in terms of a camera to use for your YouTube setup would be being able to shoot in 4K, of course at least 1080p. Those are pretty much the standard nowadays. 4K just to future-proof yourself, because that's quickly becoming the new standard. A flip screen would also be very helpful, because then for filming yourself on YouTube, it'll be very easy just to be able to see yourself, and with that, you can compose, make sure you're not off center, and then I think the biggest thing is you won't have to, run all the way around to behind your camera just to kind of see the scene and see the lighting and whatnot. You'll be able to really just directly see yourself there in the flip screen. If you don't have a flip screen, then it's not the end of the world. You can always get an external monitor that you can connect to your camera, and then that would pretty much serve as a flip screen as well. And of course, another useful or essential feature that you might want to have would be manual controls over exposure. That way, your exposure won't be jumping all over the place if you set it in any sort of auto mode, and your YouTube video would look very consistent. And pretty much most cameras that you buy nowadays, as long as they're not like a point and shoot, and even a lot of point and shoots are capable of entirely manual exposure. In terms of lenses, I would say that the requirements also aren't that high in terms of just minimum requirements to start. I would say that's because a lot of the kit lenses that do come with cameras, the ones that are very affordable, have big zoom ranges, and also have image stabilization. I feel like those would be perfect to start with. And I would say a big reason would be just because kit lenses, if you're trying to resolve them on a 24 megapixel sensor, they might appear a little soft when you zoom all the way in. But those are for 24 megapixel outputs. Keep in mind when you're uploading to YouTube, typically that's in 1080p. If you're uploading to that, then 1080p, that's around 2 megapixels. So instead of 24 megapixels, you'd be outputting at 2 megapixels. So really the limiting factor in your video sharpness wouldn't be the lens, it would be in fact the YouTube compression algorithm. Of course, what I just discussed was the minimum requirements. It ultimately depends on your particular needs, whether or not you want to spend, a couple $100 on a camera and lens, or a couple $1,000. It's entirely up to your particular needs. The particular setup that I'm using right now to film this video would be the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera and the Sigma 18 to 35 millimeter f1.8 lens. I feel like this is a very fantastic combination. It gives very high image quality, especially if you're just trying to shoot out of the camera or even just color grade your footage. For me, I had this camera. I bought it as more of an educational tool to really dive deeply into filmmaking. The second camera that I use for filmmaking would be my Sony a7 III. It has a very wide selection of lenses that are compatible, that are native, and even some third-party lenses are excellent with the Sony system that can be a lot more affordable than Sony's lenses themselves. And of course, one thing that Sony cameras are really well known for would be the autofocus. They have excellent autofocus tracking abilities, especially in video. You point it at somebody, it'll automatically track their eyes, make sure that's always in focus. So it would be very useful in run and gun situations where you don't really have time to try any focus pulling or any of that. As you can see, there's different camera systems for different needs, so it's ultimately up to you, up to your needs, up to your budget, what type of camera to get. But all in all, the minimum requirements for filming for YouTube videos are really not that high. So my second topic will be about lighting. In terms of lighting, you can go two different ways, and the first would be to go with all natural lighting. And by that, if you see the window behind me, that one, it's obviously a light source and you get light from outside coming in. You can definitely use that as your main light source. You can put your camera against the window facing you and then use the window to light yourself. I would say that the primary disadvantage of that is inconsistency. For example, if you have a cloud just floating by covering the sun for about 30 seconds while you're recording, then you're going to get very inconsistent lighting results, regardless of if you're shooting in manual exposure or auto exposure. In either case, the lighting's going to jump and you're going to get pretty inconsistent results. The benefits of natural light is that it's pretty much everywhere. So I think it's a great lighting source to start out with, but as you want to have more consistency and make it much more flexible than only shooting in specific times of the day where the lighting is flattering, then I would definitely recommend getting your own lighting gear. So in terms of how many lights you need, I would say that you really only need one. Of course, you can add more, but in reality, pretty much the only requirement is that you just have one light. In terms of what I would recommend to start, I would say definitely invest in a good LED light. Those typically are the standard nowadays. They're energy efficient. They aren't as crazy hot as the older types of lights. They're also relatively compact, since the light is produced by just these little chips instead of like a bigger bulb. So I would definitely recommend getting an LED light. The light that I have is the Godox SL60W. It's very affordable, around $120 to $130 typically, but sometimes you can get it on sale, and it produces really bright light. You probably won't be able to go outside with it because the light output is not quite as bright compared to like a sunny day lighting. So, but typically, as you can see here, I do have a little bit of light coming from outside in the windows, but this is able to adequately light me up, against that brighter background. Once you have your main light, I would recommend getting a modifier for your light. More specifically, I would recommend getting something to soften up that harsh light. If you just have your bare light, you're going to have very harsh lighting, which produces very defined shadows. It's kind of like if you walk outside around noontime and then the sun gives you, raccoon eyes because your brows are casting shadows on your eyes, that sort of thing. So in order to really avoid that, in order to soften the light up, soften up those shadows, then I would recommend getting something like a softbox or an umbrella. I have a 36-inch softbox, and I would say that it's a really good size in the middle where, it's not too large, where it will be very cumbersome to fit around your house. It's also big enough where it'll really soften the light, so it'll produce really flattering results on your subject. These can be very affordable. I've seen softboxes go from anywhere around $30 to, well, on the high end, you also have softboxes going all the way up until $200 to $300. But you know, there's a huge range, and ultimately it really depends on, you know, what brand you buy from. But quality softboxes don't have to be very expensive. One thing that I would definitely recommend paying attention to would be the mount. For example, my Godox SL60W Lite, that one has a Bowens mount. So what that means is that any softbox or light modifier that has a Bowens mount would fit directly onto my light, and with no additional accessories required. So yeah, it's kind of like camera mounts where, you know, you have a Sony mount and that only accepts Sony's lenses. Lighting equipment is pretty much the same, where you have different mounts for lighting equipment and modifiers. So definitely pay attention to the description in the product you're looking at, make sure it fits. Another modifier to consider that would be very simple to start with would be a shoot-through umbrella. These are even cheaper than softboxes, and they soften up the light quite a considerable amount compared to just shooting with the bare light. One downside that is preventing me from using them more, even though I have a few umbrellas, is because they pretty much scatter light everywhere in a way that is not as controlled, but you know, it's still pretty soft lighting, so you'll still be able to use them very well, especially in the beginning when you're testing out different modifiers for your needs. Another thing to consider is make sure you turn off all your indoor ambient lights. Typically, those are less within your control because you're not able to control them as well as, you know, putting your main light here, putting a background light here. So I would recommend turning them off, especially because they're typically very warm and they will create very warm color casts in your footage. So how about adding additional lights? As I said before, you don't really need more than one light to start, but you know, if you want to add a bit more to your production, if you want to have some backlights or even some colored lights to make your footage look more interesting, then there are definitely ways to do that by adding additional lights. For me, for example, I have a light in the background that is a Yongnuo light wand, and that one is full RGB, which means that it has different LEDs that can output pretty much any combination of colors. So it can, for example, light up my background blue. And I think that's, you know, a fantastic way just to add a little bit of accent to your footage to make it look just a bit more special. Of course, other uses for another light is to add a bit of rim light, and what that is well, right now my blue light wand and also the window from the back is casting a little bit of light right here, and then that's helping me stand out a little bit from the background, provides a little bit of contrast, so you know, I don't blend in too much. So you know, that's one advantage of having another light in the back. The Yongnuo light wand that I mentioned, that one could be had for a little over $100. I have the version 2 of the Yongnuo light wand, and that one comes with the battery built in, so all you need to do is just plug it in to charge it, and you know, it should last around 30 minutes to 2 hours depending on how bright you use it at. So the third topic would be support systems, and what I mean by that would just be, you know, tripods for your camera, boom arms for your mic, and also light stands for all of your lights. This is a pretty simple topic, so it should be summarized pretty quickly. All I would say is you should definitely consider getting equipment that is very sturdy, rated for, you know, much heavier than what camera you have, especially for a studio or if you're trying to like film outside, because, well, especially if you're trying to film outside, because oftentimes, you know, if you get any bit of wind, and then you know, if you go for the cheapest tripod that you see out there, then you're probably going to get some camera shake if there's a little bit of wind. And the same goes for your light stands. Lights are typically going to be heavier than your cameras, and you're also going to be holding them pretty high up compared to your cameras. So if it's something that's higher up, you know, you would want a more stable base, and typically, you know, you definitely want a sturdier light stand for that. So when you're shopping around for these support systems, then definitely pay attention to the weight capacities of all of these. And I wouldn't take these weight capacities too seriously. You know, sometimes they say they'll be able to support up to 8 pounds, but if you put an 8-pound camera on it, then you know it'll start to droop. I would say most cameras, especially for YouTube, wouldn't be 8 pounds. They would typically be around 2 to 3, maybe even 4 pounds. I would definitely recommend getting a tripod that can support, you know, at least I would say twice the weight of your camera. You know, it's not really a rule of thumb, but really you're just looking for a sturdy tripod and tripod head. I would say one of the most frustrating things about all this support equipment would be if you have quality equipment, you really won't notice them. You just use them as normal. If you didn't budget that much for them and ended up buying cheaper versions of these support systems, then I would say that oftentimes you'll run into issues down the line, especially, you know, if you upgrade your camera got heavier, upgrade your lights got heavier, then these systems will not be up to par, and you'll encounter some issues with them falling over, having shaky footage with any bit of wind. I would say, you know, just in the beginning, invest in a quality tripod, quality light stand, and these things typically tend to outlast your cameras. The camera support system that I'm shooting on right now, it's an aluminum tripod. I've had it ever since 2014, and that has definitely outlasted the majority of my cameras. And similarly for my light stand, I bought it around the same time, and you know, it still functions as new. All you need to do is just, you know, occasionally tighten it in case it gets loose. But you know, these, as long as you buy something that's great quality, you're gonna find that it pays itself off over the long run, instead of having to buy a ton of cheap ones just because they keep breaking. So the fourth topic that I do want to cover would be sound equipment. This topic is actually quite the important topic because sound constitutes half of your video's content. Half of it is going to be visuals and the other half is going to be sound. If you think about it, if you just cut out the video and you just have the sound, then the whole thing, you know, is still its own content, because, you know, that can be put into a podcast, and, you know, that's a form of delivering your content. But for YouTube, of course, you also have the video component, and lighting is what goes into the video portion of it, and sound is also what goes into the other portion of it. To me, sound is pretty simple, partially because I am not a sound engineer. I think it's pretty simple because you really don't need much equipment. In this aspect, all you really need is one quality microphone. Once you have that one quality microphone, that should be sufficient for the majority of your YouTube videos. I would say that getting a quality microphone is really important because that is half of your content and the audio portion. So, you know, delivering your content in a way that, you know, is very low quality is the equivalent of having a very blurry picture in all your videos, or shooting in very low resolution. It's going to be a little jarring to your audience. So I would definitely recommend getting you know, sound equipment that is high quality, and that's something that, similar to your support systems, would definitely last a very long time, might even outlast your cameras as well. I am also recording audio on my smartphone, which is pretty equivalent to camera audio quality, and comparing it to my dedicated microphone, which is right here. So yeah, have a listen, and hopefully you can tell a bit of a difference that it makes. The microphone that I'm using is the Rode Video Mic NTG. I think it's a great microphone. It records really high quality and it's directional, so pretty much anything in front of the microphone itself would be picked up, versus if it's on the side, then it'll be muffled out. So, you know, if your home environment, it tends to be a little noisy, you can still try to isolate that by pointing your mic in a direction where you get the least amount of sound. So once you have a quality mic, that should be pretty much it for audio for YouTube. In summary, setting up your first YouTube studio or your first YouTube filming setup can be pretty simple. All you really need is a camera with a lens, a microphone, a light, and support systems for all of these, which is pretty much just a tripod, a light stand, and a boom arm. Once you have all of these, you should be pretty much all set. I would say it's very simple to start, but of course there's always a lot more to learn about each individual component of this setup. Again, my advice would be to buy quality over buying the cheapest option that you see out there. That's really just to save you money in the long run. I hope it helped. If it did, feel free to like and subscribe. Feel free to share this with other people that might find it helpful, and hopefully I'll create more content similar to this. Thank you, and see you guys next time.